Hi, I'm Andy Jones, your host for Art Talk. I have literally taught thousands of people to paint. If you have any desire to learn how to paint, with a little guidance, I can show you exactly how to do it. We're going to be doing a lot of a dry brush technique, so there'll be lots of layering, and Stephen will move this on through so that you don't die of boredom.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of little wisps of blades of grass here.
Yes, but that's not coming till later. We're gonna get started with our sky. But I want to let you know that I've painted my canvas with pure black and let it dry, and then I've sketched just the bare minimum of a design on there, and we will have a downloadable design in the description box below the video where you can click that link and get your design so that you don't have to learn anything about drawing today. But we are going to be doing, as I mentioned, a dry brush technique. So that will indicate to you that we will not be using
water.
Exactly. So I'm going to start out by putting a little bit of aqua on my palette, and I'm also going to put out a little bit of Calypso sky, and I'm also going to put out some white.
Are we using a lot of white? Is that why you have the big bottle, or is that just what you had in front of you?
I like a big bottle of white because I do tend to go through a lot of white paint, even though, as I'll be telling you today, to use just a small amount of paint. But if you use enough small amounts of paint, you end up going through it. So I have a Select Firm Bristle brush, which is available in one of our Art Talk kits. So I'm going to start off with just a bit of aqua. I have a minimum amount of paint on this brush, but I want you to get into the habit of just giving a little wipe on your shop towel to take any excess paint off the brush. Having less paint on your brush is more important than anything else. If you have too much paint, you'll know instantly because you'll leave a blob on your canvas. And what I'm going to do is begin to brush this aqua onto the canvas, and you can see that most of the black is still showing through. So the paint is only collecting on the ridges of the canvas weave. So this is the technique that we're going to use throughout the painting of this little autumn landscape. So I'm holding the brush back at the end of the handle loosely in my hand, and I do not need to apply much pressure to the brush. The paint will come off, and you can see I am stretching this paint out just about as far as I can go. And this is just the first of many layers we're going to put on this painting. I'm going to pick up a tiny bit more paint, take the excess off on my shop towel, and I'm going to put some aqua between the trunks of my trees. So where I want a tree trunk, I'm not going to paint with aqua. So we're just painting what is called the negative space, and you want to make sure that your tree trunks are of different sizes, because in the forest, as we all know, not all trees are exactly the same size. But you can see now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 tree trunks. And sometimes it's easier just to turn your canvas so that it's easier to paint and get a little line next to your tree trunks. Without actually putting any paint on the tree trunks, I've got my trunks already painted, and I can take a little bit of that excess paint off the brush and just continue to dry brush a little bit more aqua onto this black canvas. Now I'm going to make a mistake here just to show you. If you pick up paint, and even if you think you don't have much on your brush, if you don't take the excess off, you can get a blob of paint on there, and that's way, way more paint than we want. So here is your pro tip. If you see that you have too much paint on the canvas the first time you touch your brush there, stop. It's not going to correct itself right then and there. You do need to wipe that excess paint off on your shop towel, and then when you go back, you can kind of camouflage that area where you had too much paint, and you're in good shape. But always remember, use as little paint as you can, and if you think you've got too much when you apply it to your surface, stop. Take the excess paint off your brush. I've got my first layer of blue in my sky. My sky's still pretty dark, still pretty moody, and that's okay. We're going to let a lot of this black still show through no matter how much paint we put on top of our canvas. But I am going to shift colors now, and I'm going to lighten my aqua with a little bit of Calypso Sky. So I'm making a brush mixture of this, and I like to mix with my brush so that every time I pick up paint, I get a little bit of a difference in color. Now I've put a lot of paint on that brush, even though it's still pretty scant there. I'm going to wipe the excess off on my shop towel, and then I'm going to start back on the canvas applying this lighter color, and I'm moving my brush basically from corner to corner, shifting where the pressure on the brush goes. So sometimes it's on this corner, and then I'll flip my pressure to the other corner. And this gives me a much more random application of color rather than just pulling in a straight line. I'm going to lighten this color even further with more of the Calypso Sky, and then make sure to take the excess paint off on my shop towel. You're going to be tired of hearing that. Let's not forget that every now and then we are going to need to lighten up this area between our tree trunks. Otherwise, that'll be a very spooky part of our autumn landscape. We do need to put some clouds in the sky because they always make a painting more interesting. So I'm going to wipe my brush out, and I'm going to pick up some titanium white, and then I'm going to take the excess paint off of the brush just like I did before. And I'm going to just start over here on the right hand side to develop a little cloudy area, or an area of clouds. And then I'm going to work over here, and we're going to do a bigger, brighter area of clouds down here. I want to kind of in my mind make sure I'm kind of creating a cloud shape, and this cloud shape kind of goes up and then kind of follows the angle of the grasses down. Pick up a little bit more white, take the excess paint off of our brush, and we'll put a little cloud up here too. Alternating corners of the brush where I'm applying more pressure. And Stephen, do you think that's all we're doing to the clouds?
I would assume no.
You're absolutely right. We're going to do it again. So wipe our brush off really well, pick up some titanium white, make sure we don't have any excess paint on our brush, and we're going to reinforce our little fluffy clouds. Opposite corners of the brush, keeping the edges of our cloud formation very loose and more abstract. When you're painting clouds in any kind of landscape, you always want to make sure that your clouds look like generic clouds. You don't want to look at the cloud you've painted and go, oh my god, that cloud looks like a bunny rabbit. Because if you look at your clouds that you've painted and you see a bunny rabbit, that's all anybody that looks at your painting is going to see. Putting down my big brush, and I'm going to pick up a number 12 flat brush, and we're going to put some different colors out on our palette. I need a little bit of black, yellow ochre, and then some yellow light. We've got a tree over here that's got more green in it, and it looks like it's got two distinct sections of the tree. And then we've got a more yellow tree over here, and you can see that the outside edges are a little bit darker, and it gets brighter in here in the center of the tree. So those are just a couple of things to keep in mind as we start painting our tree. Now, Stephen, are you a leaf peeper?
I don't even know what that means, so probably not.
Leaf peeping is when the trees start to turn colors in the fall. People drive to go look at fall foliage.
No,
not you.
I'm not. I can Google image it. I'm not going through all that.
The leaf peepers, you know, they know where the best foliage is at different times of the year, and they will drive to see it.
You know, respect to those people who can spend that kind of gas money.
That's true. All right, so I've got black and I'm adding a little bit of yellow ochre to this, and I am basically creating a very dark, very dull green color. Stephen and I are here in Georgia, which is not known for its spectacular fall foliage. You know, up in more of the New England area, there are spectacular fall foliage displays as the trees change. So we've got a little leaf jealousy going on. But we're going to start here on our green trees. So again, I've mixed this dark, dull green with my brush, and I'm wiping out the excess on my palette. I'm going to start right at the edge of the canvas and kind of alternating the pressure on the different corners of the brush. And you can see that I've got a little bit of this light section started right there, and we're going to just kind of lightly brush and scrub. And I'm bringing this right down, just a little bit of color going on there, and I will, whoa, got too much paint there, but I will make a little bit lighter color here, just so you can see where the edge of my tree really stops. So you can see where the tree stops, and then there's just a little bit of that dark color just down there to kind of give that dark canvas a little bit of color there. All right, and you can see how long I'm stretching out this application of paint without going back and picking up more color on my brush. Because I don't really want excess color. I want you to be able to see the black coming through. All right, so we're going to wipe our brush off, and we are going to pick up more yellow ochre, making our dark, dull green a little bit lighter in value. Again, take the excess paint off on the shop towel. And I'm going to start, let me bring this in closer for you to see. So I'm going to start developing two distinct sections of my tree. And so I'm going to leave this kind of darkish division there, and I'm also going to leave it darker over here along the left and the bottom. So we're going to start up here at the lighter section at the top of this tree formation. And it doesn't take much pressure on your brush, so you don't have to bear down, but you can see that I've already got one section of that tree done just that quickly and easily. And then I'm going to leave a little gap, and I'm going to start this lighter section of the tree. And if I need to, I can pick up more paint. And then what, Stephen?
Wipe it out.
That's the technique. You got it. Stephen is a very quick learner when it comes to painting techniques.
Well, especially when the technique is, for the whole painting, one technique. Yeah.
That's right. Well, we're going to do a couple of other things,
Okay.
but it is basically picking up paint, wiping it off on your towel before you apply color to your painting. I like to give a lot of different techniques to the folks that tune into these videos so that you can realize that there's always another way to paint something. One way is not the be-all and end-all. Okay, so we continue with our lighter kind of dull green color, and you can see that I am developing those two sections of the tree, just like I said I would. And I'm going to add a little bit more yellow ochre, wipe the excess off on my shop towel, and we'll make a little bit lighter value to the tree. And if you put paint on and you've changed your value and you can't see it, then you haven't changed your value enough. Stop, make an adjustment, and then come back and continue painting. Dry brushing on a color you can't see isn't really very helpful. So to keep this tree a little bit more green than this larger tree is going to be, I'm going to pick up some yellow light and mix that in so that I'm creating a lighter, more green color. And I'm going to wipe the excess off on my shop towel. All right, so we're going to start again back up here. And I know somebody's wondering, is this wet underneath? And I can tell you it is such a small amount of paint that that's pretty dry. I can tell by the look on Stephen's face he was worried that that paint was dry underneath.
I was stressing.
I know.
Completely.
Don't want to do that to you. All right, so we are adding some of this lighter green color on. Then we'll wipe our brush really well, and we'll lighten this color again by the addition of more yellow light. Brush mix that color, and then we will wipe the excess off on our shop towel before we come back to our painting. And we will add yet another layer of a lighter value color. And again, we are letting lots of that dark from the black of the canvas show through. All right, so I have a tree formation that has kind of two sections to it, and we're going to leave that alone. So now we are going to start on our main tree, which is really going to be one of our two areas of interest in our painting. We've got the light in the tree, and then we've got the light here in this kind of V-shaped area in our meadow. We're just giving the brush a really nice, thorough wiping. I like to put the brush down and pinch it between the shop towel and then give it a gentle pull. That gets a lot of paint out, and it also keeps your brush groomed into a nice shape. Again, we're going to take yellow ochre this time and add just a little tiny bit of black to it so that it's lighter than what we started on our other tree formation. Take the excess paint off of our shop towel, and we are going to kind of lay in the shape of this tree. So this tree is kind of up almost to the top of the canvas, and then it drops down, and we've got this little area over here that's kind of a bit of tufted off to the side, and this tree is going to have a little bit of this dark halo, kind of give this tree a little bit bigger shape than it's going to look in the end. And so I've got branches that are reaching out over here, and they drop back in, and then they come back out. What you do not want is to have your tree looking like any defined shape. Again, no bunny rabbits, no paw prints, no anything that is definable. And you also want to make sure that the edges are very faint and distributed out. So the edge of your tree should have a very lacy look to it. And we're just working this color over the entire mass of this tree. Again, I'm holding my brush as far back on the handle as I can and very loosely in my hand. That'll help me have a bit more of a painterly look as I work on this tree formation here. Because we've got a number of trunks here, so we know that we've got, more than just one single tree. So keep continuing with my yellow ochre plus a little bit of black, and I'm going to make sure that every time I pick up paint that I take the excess off of the brush. Okay, we're going to wipe our brush out really well, and we're going to change over to just yellow ochre. So one thing that may happen as you paint, so we had black and yellow ochre and yellow light in this brush. So all of that paint's still in there. And if we want to really kind of get rid of all of those extra colors, we are going to do a technique that's called neutralizing your brush. So instead of rinsing my brush in water, which would make my brush wet and not dry, I am going to continue to pick up my yellow ochre, or it could be any color, and really work that color into the brush and then wipe that color out. And if you do that a few times, you will basically change the color that's in the brush from this kind of dark green just to our yellow ochre. And it might take 3 or 4 times to really get back to just a nice yellow ochre color. And I think I'm good enough for what we're doing today. So once I've done all of that, I am going to pick up my yellow ochre and then wipe the excess off on my shop towel. And I'm going to ask Stephen to get a real good close-up of this dirty shop towel so you can see where I went from this kind of dark greenish just to my yellow ochre. And it took, a few tries, but I've got basically yellow ochre just in my brush now. And we are going to, now that we've got a lighter color, and I'll show you just that it really does show up as a much lighter color, I'm going to begin to put in the areas that I know I want to remain light throughout the painting of this entire tree formation. So wherever I know I want my branches to be lighter, like I don't want this part to be lighter, so I'm going to let the light color fade over there. And then I'm going to kind of lift this area of foliage forward. And the technique remains the same, altering pressure on opposite corners of the brush and then just dragging that very scant amount of paint across the canvas. I know there are lots of painters who paint, with very, very heavy amounts of paint, and that certainly is a valid way of doing it. But I think this is just as valid and gives you a bit more control over your paint application.
Did you have a certain location in mind when you were painting this, like where this scene is?
No, but if I look out from my back door, the property slopes down and then there's another big hill. So you get that kind of little valley-esque look, and we've got lots of trees. Surprisingly, for living basically in downtown Atlanta. So just kind of, looking around at what you have in your area can really inspire you. And then the other thing is to take complete artistic license and just change things to suit you. When I was, looking out in my backyard, my trees go from green to brown. There is no beautiful yellow tree out there. So this is just what I would like to imagine my fall landscape out my back door looks like. I'm going to continue some of this over here on this right side, but I'm going to give this area right here, I'm going to leave that very, very dark so that you can tell that this tree formation is in front of this one simply because there is this dark area that kind of separates those trees. All right, so we've just about got enough yellow ochre on that tree so that you can see that this tree is obviously much more yellow than this tree, which still has green leaves on it. So wiping out my brush really thoroughly, taking out almost all of that yellow ochre, and we're going to start with some fresh yellow ochre and some yellow light picked up together on the brush. This should have more yellow ochre than yellow light. As you're lightening colors using the dry brush technique, you don't want to race through your values. If you skip from a medium to a light color without going through a couple of value changes, it's very jarring, and you don't want jarring color in your painting. Right, so you can see that there's a difference in this color and that color. That's what you want, but it's not shocking to the system. Usually a gradual transition in values is much more pleasing to the eye than really, really sharp value contrast. And we just continue to add more yellow ochre and lighten our colors up as we brighten our tree formation. Okay, so I've got several layers on here right now, and it's probably at this point where everything's starting to be just a little bit sticky. So I would recommend taking a little break and letting this dry before we come back and continue our highlights. I'd like to take a minute to thank Plaid Enterprises for sponsoring Art Talk. They are the makers of folk art acrylics, which I absolutely love using. I've used this paint since I was a young tot, and now that I'm an old fart, I still use this paint. We have a 17-piece set that we've curated just for you. Ordering information is in the description below, and we also have great brushes for you. We have a 7-piece set of Folk Art Select Firm Bristle brushes. These are absolutely incredible. I use them every time I paint. And I've never done that in my entire life. Now, let's get back to our video. This is now thoroughly dry, and we can continue on with our lightening of this tree. But before we do that, let's put out a little bit of hot saffron And I'm going to pick up a different brush. I'm going to pick up a small number 8 flat brush, and I'm going to thin down my hot saffron with a little bit of water. So I'm going to add some orange to my tree, and then that's pretty bright, so I'm going to blot it with my finger. Your fingers are great painting tools. Never forget they're on your hand anytime you need them. They're right there for you. So I'm going to put a little bit more orange out there, and then just tap it with my finger to kind of soften that in a little bit. We'll put a little bit of orange over here, and this is thinned down with water, so you can easily see through it. That's a nice amount of orange. If that seems too bright for you, then take a little bit of burnt sienna. We're going to be using a lot more of that later on, but you can take a little burnt sienna, thin that down with water, and you can tone down any of that orange that seems too bright. It also gives some variation to the rusty tones that we have in our foliage. And we're going to cover a lot of that up. So we've got some rusty tones in our tree, and I think that's good for right now. So let's go back to our number 12 flat brush that is dry, and we can wait for this orange to dry before we start painting on top of it. All right, my rusty tones and oranges are dry, and I've got my dry number 12 flat brush, and I'm going to pick up mostly yellow light and a little bit of yellow ochre. If you notice how we kind of switched the important color in our mixture. Here we were yellow ochre adding a little bit of yellow light. Here we're yellow light adding a little bit of yellow ochre. Okay, now with my brush barely loaded with that lighter color, we're going to add those light areas to this tree. And again, still alternating corners of the brush to get variation of paint application. And you just want to keep looking at your tree and channeling your inner Bob Ross, making sure that you have a happy little tree. And I think it's just about time that we really start to brighten up our tree quite a bit. So I'm going to pick up some more of our yellow light here, and I'm going to add some titanium white to my yellow light, and you will see a dramatic shift in value when I put this on, because our white is such an opaque color. It really does change how our yellow light looks. So there you can see when we start to put some of that yellow that has some white in it, you really do start to get a nice, really bright kind of highlight going on your foliage. And this is not quite pointillism painting, which would be just a series of tiny little dots placed next to each other, but this does have a bit of optical blending, which is where you have colors close in value placed close together on a painting, and your eye takes care of the actual blending of those colors. It's starting to look pretty good, and continue to add a small amount of titanium white to my yellow, and same application that we started our entire painting with, we're doing here on the tree. Again, pressure on one corner of the brush and the other corner. Right, I'm going to add a bit more white this time and really add some of the brighter highlights. And you can see how dramatically different this light color is from where we started. The technique isn't difficult at all. You simply have to remember to have the right amount of paint on your brush. Too much paint is your enemy. And again, I think I've put several layers on, and the paint is not quite dry, it's just a little sticky. So we're going to take a little bit of a break here, and you and I are both going to dry our canvases, and then we'll come back and put the final highlights on. Okay, so our tree is now dry. Shouldn't have taken but a minute because we're using such thin layers of paint. I'm once again going to take some yellow light, and this time a good bit of titanium white to make sure that color's a little lighter than what we had before. And I'm going to take the excess paint off on a shop towel, and we're going to add just some final highlights, and you can see that these highlights are very, very pale yellow. So I'm adding on some brighter white highlights, and you can see that everything is not the same, and we've got some breaks in our highlight shape. So let's take a minute and dry this real quick. And we had our little number 8 flat brush that we had done some orange accenting with, and let's come back and take some more of our hot saffron, thin that down, and we can add, now that we know how bright our tree is, we can add a little bit stronger accent of the hot saffron. You can see that really clearly here, and we'll put some more up here. And this color going over our more highlighted tree gives a little different color, and I like that very, very much. So if my tree doesn't look quite as yellow or gold as I would like it to, I can take my brush, my little number 8, and thin down some yellow light, pretty thin, and let's just add some intense yellow to our tree. You can see how we've got now this incredible yellowy color going on, and that's because we're using a thin, transparent layer of color to alter the local color of our tree. Now we've added some nice yellow accents to our tree, and I think we can leave our tree alone at this point, and we're going to start to develop some of our weeds and grasses by creating a soft gray color. So I'm going to take some titanium white and add a little bit of black. That's obviously not a little bit of black, so I'm going to wipe my brush off, and that will be better for me. Creating a gray color, and I'm going to add a bit of aqua to that. So this is a grayish color with a little bit of a blue undertone to it. And what I'm going to do is concentrate mainly at the top of this little grassy formation, and I check my color, and I need a little bit more black because that's too light in value. That's better. And I'm just going to create kind of the top of what is some background tree line. If yours is too light, go ahead and add a bit more black to it. You can't judge color unless you are on top of the color you want to see. So you can't judge color from here to there. You have to have the color right where you are wanting to evaluate it. So I'm making sure that this kind of odd little tree line is not all the same height, so that there's some variation in the height as it moves down to kind of go in front of our tree trunks, and then we're just going to let it kind of disappear over to the right hand side. And I'll wipe a lot of the color out of my brush, and we'll just continue to kind of very loosely kind of fill in some of this kind of tree line area. Make sure that I've got some rust color going on in this background area. So I've got my burnt sienna and I've got hot saffron out on my palette. I'm going to wipe my brush really well, and I'm going to pick up some burnt sienna, and I'm picking up a pretty good amount of paint on my brush, and I'm simply going to make some vertical marks. I'm trying to be very careful not to label these as being anything other than vertical marks of paint, because I don't really know what they are, and I don't think in the overall scheme of this painting that it really matters what they are either. But I'm just putting a few of them. They're not lined up, they're not the same height, always working to create some variation in the size and shape of things in the painting, so that your painting is always as visually interesting for the viewer as you can make it. All right, so we've got some burnt sienna marks in the background, and let's pick up a little bit of hot saffron and accent a few of those, not all of them. And I don't like that it looks like they're skipping every other one, so I'm going to go back there and just skip a few there. All right, so now we've got some interesting little marks back there. And the next thing I'm going to do, grab like a 3/4 inch flat brush, and I want to put out a little bit more burnt sienna, and I'm also going to put out a little bit of burnt umber, and we are going to kind of lay in the meadow area. And this is only foundational color. This is not how it's going to end. It's just a way to start. So picking up a fairly good amount of paint, using the corner of my brush, and I'm just scrubbing some of this paint on in a little bit of a angle so that we start the formation of our meadow area. And then I'm going to turn my canvas over this way so I can just, again, use the corner of my brush, and we'll just scrub a little bit more of this rusty color on. Now I'll take some burnt umber. Burnt sienna is a nice rusty red color, and burnt umber is a nice kind of chocolate brown color. And we need those kind of variations in our meadow. So you can see that there's still plenty of black showing through, and we've got this kind of separation of the reeds and grasses in our meadow going on. So nothing difficult. All right, and now that we've got that application of color on there, we need to dry it before we start to put some flowers in our meadow. So our meadow has been established with burnt sienna and burnt umber, and it's dry. So let's take our number 8 flat brush and let's put in some meadow flowers. I'm going to rinse this brush out to get rid of my rusty colors. I'm going to put in some, what I'm laughingly going to call larger and more involved flowers. But I'm going to take some titanium white and a little bit of burnt umber, and we're going to make a lighter brown color. And then I'm going to put in, I don't know, usually try to do an odd number of things, but you just need to make sure that the flowers that you put in are well shaped and well placed. So I'm using the corner of my brush, and I am kind of creating an oval flower head shape. So I'm just putting in a few of these. I'm going to wipe my brush out now, and I'm going to pick up more burnt umber, and I'm going to create a darker area on these flowers. And I'm going to do that by kind of tapping at the left hand side and along the bottom. So left hand side and at the bottom. And no, I know Stephen's about to ask me what kind of flowers these are, and I have to tell him I don't know.
Oh, well, you beat me to it.
These are just woodland flowers. These are probably the kind of things that you picked as a kid, brought them inside, and then found out they were full of some sort of bugs or something like that. All right, so I picked up burnt sienna on my number 8 flat brush, and I'm going to add a few of these kind of rusty flowers. We're going to come back and we're going to do some more of these, but I want to put a few in just so you get accustomed to creating a flower that is nothing more than just a brush stroke, and not even a real complete brush stroke. And then I'm going to lighten my burnt sienna with a bit of hot saffron. I'm just going to put in a few of these. All right, so I've got my little flower forms in there. We've got our interesting little kind of tree-lined shrubs and marks in there. And what we need to do now is to get a filbert brush. And Stephen has this quizzical look on his face going, what is a filbert brush? So for those that don't know, a filbert brush is basically a flat brush that does not have any corners on it. It is rounded, and it is very, very good for creating lots of lines, grasses, things like that. So I'm going to dampen my filbert brush, and I'm going to start with a little bit of burnt sienna, and we will change colors in this brush a number of times, to say the least, as we create our meadow full of grasses. But I think starting off with some burnt sienna will let you practice up and get in the swing of creating grasses with a filbert brush. So the easiest thing to do is we'll cover up most of this so you won't even see it, but we'll start by taking the brush and we'll just kind of fling the brush up. And if flinging the brush up doesn't work for you, it's probably going to be easier for you to turn your painting around and pull toward you. And the important thing is that as you do this, you will create varying weight of line. So some lines will be thicker, some will be thinner, some will be longer, some will be shorter. And we're just going to cover our meadow with a smattering of these burnt sienna grasses or reeds. Your paint doesn't necessarily have to be really, really thin and runny. You just want it to be fluid so that it comes off of the brush easily. And this takes a little bit of practice to get used to doing this, but once you do, it's pretty easy. And you're just creating lots of little reeds and grasses. Load the brush flat down so that you have a nice, very sharp chisel edge so that you can paint thin little lines. We're going to start and pull more reeds over here on this side of our meadow. And we need to remember that some of these reeds need to be a bit more vertical. They can have a little bit of a lean to the outside, but you don't want it to look like you're parting the Red Sea here. This is just reeds, kind of that have overgrown, maybe a little footpath. But if everything looks like it's being swept aside, that's not going to be terribly attractive. That's why we're starting again with this burnt sienna, to give you a chance to practice and to help really kind of get this little reeds established. All right, so we have now kind of laid in some rusty reeds in our meadow. And now we're going to start to put in some yellow ochre reeds. So I'm going to take my filbert brush and I'm going to pick up some yellow ochre. And this is not going to be pure yellow ochre. It's yellow ochre with some burnt sienna in it. And we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to start to paint in some reeds. I'm going to turn this upside down because it's easier to pull toward me. And I'm going to start and just show you how we're going to pull on some of these reeds. And they don't all have to start at the bottom of the painting, and they can curve more, and you can come back and kind of go over that. So there's a lot of variation that you can put in here. What you don't want to do is to have a solid application of this color and completely cover up everything that's underneath. You want a little bit of those rusty reeds to show through. Now, in addition to using just your filbert brush, which I'm going to swap back and forth, I'm also going to use a liner brush. And I like a script liner brush because the bristles are longer and they hold more paint than a regular liner brush. But for a liner brush, your paint needs to be a very thin, fluid consistency, and you need to use very, very light pressure on your brush. You can start and you can just use light pressure and pull thin, fine lines to represent your reeds. And because this brush is smaller than your filbert brush, you will have to stop and reload this brush much more often than you will your filbert. So pros and cons to either brush, but what you want is lots of reeds that have variation in their width and length. And you can stop and switch out your brush just depending on how you are feeling. And I'm going to add a little bit of burnt sienna there so that I continue with my reeds that are not quite solid yellow ochre. Okay, now we've got these kind of yellowy, rusty reeds in, and we need to change our color. So we're going to get rid of any traces of burnt sienna that were in our brush, and we are going to pick up only yellow ochre, and we are going to put in some yellow ochre grasses and reeds using the same technique, using our filbert brush and our script liner brush kind of interchangeably. Whichever works for you is the brush you should use. So hopefully as you add these, you will see that they are lighter in value than the reeds that you just put on. And so these are going to not carry out quite as far as what we've already done. Once again, let's just turn our painting upside down so it's easier to pull these little reeds on. And it's the same technique, just a lighter color. Okay, we have yellow ochre reeds and grasses. Now we need to lighten that up a little bit more. So let's start with our filbert brush. Which one is I using? Here we are. So let's take our filbert brush, yellow ochre. Let's add a little bit of yellow light and a little bit of titanium white because we want something different than we had with our tree. We want a different color. And once again, we want our paint to be a nice fluid consistency. And we're going to keep this a little bit more toward the center of our canvas and in this kind of little V-shaped area that we're developing. And if you need to, once again, you can turn your painting upside down so that it's easier to pull these grasses toward you. At this point in this painting, you could probably paint these grasses any direction that you need to. And let's just add more white to our mixture and make sure to thin it down. And we'll begin to add some more highlight grass in our field or meadow. And I'm going to shift to my liner brush. And I want to make sure that I've got a really light color, so I might even add some more white to this so that we make very light grass. I'm going to add a little yellow light to this too so that we get some more yellowy grasses going on. And again, they don't all have to start at the bottom of the painting. You can start wherever you want to and let them trail down. These are the real highlight kind of reeds that are going to show up the most. And so, of course, you want these to be the most graceful. But at this point, you're an absolute pro at painting these little reeds. So I have no doubt that you're able to do them with ease. And these do not go out to the outside edges of the canvas. We're going to kind of keep these more centralized so that they focus your eye. Just kind of let them happen as they will. You're not going to be able to always control exactly how your little grass looks, or you're not going to get the perfect blade of grass in the exact spot you want it. So don't even try for that. All right, so we've got lots of variation in our reeds and grasses now. So let's let this dry so that we don't put our hand in our wet grass right now. So our meadow is dry and we are ready to add some more flowers to our painting. So I'm going to take a little bit of hot saffron, and this time I actually want to get a good amount of paint on my brush. So we're going to add some hot saffron little flowers, and I'm going to show you just how easy they are to paint. So touch your brush to the surface and make a little pull. And those are your hot saffron little flower forms. Sometimes you don't need any.
Now, it's not real saffron that
No,
this
it's the
field is
color.
growing. This is
No.
just the color.
Do you know what saffron is?
It doesn't grow in what looks like a southeast fall landscape, I'm certain.
No, it doesn't. It comes from the crocus flower. And it's usually, there are 3 or 5 little stamens inside the crocus flower. And they are plucked from the flower. And that's what saffron is.
You know, I had never heard the word stamen until I started working here. Just due to the amount of flowers we produce here.
Exactly. Well, it's also, you know, sometimes it's what you need to know are the things that you learn. So if you didn't need to know about parts of flowers, you wouldn't necessarily know that. But saffron, to go on with that, is one of the most expensive spices
I did
in the
know
world.
that.
And there are funny pictures, and I'm sure you'll be able to find one, of people harvesting saffron. And there's like a dump truck full of flowers, and you see this woman sitting there, and she's literally pulling these little bits out of the center of these flowers. All right, so we've gotten some hot saffron flowers in there, and so let's take a little bit of yellow light and some hot saffron to make a lighter orangey color. Now, question for you, Stephen. Would you go camping in this sort of landscape?
Yeah, I think I would. What about you?
If there was a nice hotel close by, I would stay there.
That's camping, sure. Yeah.
So again, I've got some hot saffron and some yellow light making a lighter orange flower, and I'm not putting a ton of them in, just a few here and there.
When was the last time you went camping? Okay.
Probably.
That look tells me a lot.
Yeah, that look. I was probably in elementary school, and it was probably camping in the backyard with my grandma.
Okay, elementary school, that's like 30 years ago, right?
If only. It was a good 40 years ago, probably. And I'm fine with not going camping since then.
I was trying to throw you a bone and let you be younger than you are.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but, you know, I reference too many things that people watching know that I'm older than I appear. Things in the mirror are older than they appear. All right, I'm going to put out a little bit of fresh yellow ochre here, and I'm going to make some, they aren't really flowers, but I don't really know what to call them, but we're going to make a mixture of yellow ochre, titanium white, and some yellow light. And I'm going to add some dabs of this. It's very similar color to what we did with our light reeds that we put on there, but I want to add some dabs, for lack of a better description here. Try not to turn them into something important, because they really are simply blotches of this kind of light gold color, and I'm putting them on kind of in this lighter area here. So you can see we've just got some little dabs of this kind of light color, and we need that to kind of break up our reeds because we don't want everything to look like some vertical stroke there. We want some variety in texture and shape. So adding a little bit more white to my mixture here, and we'll put a few more little dabs of that on there. All right, and Stephen, we are coming down to the end of this. We are now going to use an old toothbrush, and we are going to create a very directed series of spatters on our painting. So I want to make a mixture of some white and I think some yellow ochre.
I'm going to come back to this. I'm going to keep calling you out on this so-called camping you've done. So you camped in your backyard, elementary school.
Yep.
I guess you weren't in danger of any bears or anything in your backyard.
Well, I mean, I'm a country boy, not by choice, but I mean, we lived in a very rural area on, acres of property. I don't think a bear was I wasn't worried about a bear. Certainly my grandmother wasn't worried about a bear. I was probably more worried about mosquitoes.
Yeah, that's actually the biggest thing.
All right, so let me give you pro tips about spattering with a toothbrush. You want to keep the bristles pointing where you want your spatters to happen. So if you want your spatters on your canvas, point your bristles toward the canvas. Pull your finger toward you so the paint spatters away from you. And you always want to test on something before you go to your painting. Now, other things I will tell you. If your paint is thick, it will make very, very, very fine spatters. The thinner your paint, the thicker your spatters will be. So I'm going to test right here so you can see, if Stephen can get a close-up of this, you can see kind of what that spatter pattern looks like. And that's pretty nice to me. So I'm going to direct on my painting where I want my spatters to go and spatter kind of carefully. I'm not just doing an overall kind of snowy sky here. We're adding this for interest down in this reedy area. But you can control kind of where those spatters go, and you don't have to obliterate your entire painting. So I'm going to pick up a little bit more water because I want a few bigger spatters, thinning my paint down a little bit more. They're nice size now, so we'll put a few of these on. Now with your spattering, if you happen to get spatters where you don't want them, use clean water and you should be able to come in and kind of quickly scrub away any little spatters that you don't want. But once they've dried, you can scratch them off with a fingernail or an X-Acto knife or a box cutter if you really need to get rid of a little spatter that you don't like. All right, so that is our autumn landscape. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Art Talk. Appreciate Stephen being here in the studio with me. And I want to let you know that if you are interested in creating this painting, the link to the downloadable design is in the description box below, as is a link to our Art Talk kit. If you have questions or compliments you'd like to leave us, please do so in the comment section. We really do appreciate hearing from you, and we invite you to like and subscribe to this YouTube channel.